My name is Bill Vickers, William H. Vickers. I'm a Colorado native, born in Fowler in 1923. At the time of the Pearl Harbor attack, I was a college student in Grand Junction going to Mesa Junior College. And it was a big excitement what the invasion there was. And quickly after that, every young man wanted to be part of the war. It was a popular war. And I went with some friends to join the Navy Air Corps within about a week after Pearl Harbor. And I was rejected for an inguinal hernia that I didn't know I had. Well, I had to do something for the war. I wasn't acceptable to the services, so I went to a government welding school and then went to California to build ships and help the war. In the shipyard, I learned a lot of things. I learned about unions, and I learned about cost plus contracts. This shipyard had more welders than they had welding machines, and you had to really rush to try to get a machine so you could work every day. Those who didn't have a machine so they could weld had to go to a place where the union steward told us that we would not be caught by the Navy inspectors, and we'd sit around and shoot the bull all day, brag about what we were going to do and all that sort of thing. My schnick was that I was going to join the Marines, who were landing on Guadalcanal at that time. And they thought I didn't have the guts. So one day I said, tomorrow's my day off. I'm going to San Francisco and I'm going to join the Marines. And I did, because I knew I would be rejected. And because I had already tried to join. Well, at the Marine recruiting office, went through the questions and the forms and so forth. Last thing was inspection by the Navy doctor, and he says, welcome to the Marines. I said, didn't you notice that inguinal hernia there? He said, oh yeah, I saw that. We'll patch that up as soon as you get out of boot camp. And so I was in the Marines. After a month at home to put my affairs together, I went to San Diego for a 16 weeks boot camp. At the end of the boot camp, lo and behold, they did fix my hernia. They also, while I was working in the shipyards, I had been getting my Depression-era teeth fixed up. I had lots of money because I was making $1.32 an hour. That was big money. And I was all done except for one tooth that needed to be pulled. Well, the Navy said, no problem, we'll pull that. And so I went, while I was in boot camp, to the dental office, and the dentist came back after lunch, and he had had more than one martini, maybe more than two. And so he got in my mouth and he pulled a tooth. He says, oh, I'm sorry, I got the wrong one. I'll get the other one. So he did. That sounds irrelevant, but it plays a big part in my future life, that one extra tooth. Well, after boot camp, I was sent to intelligence school for combat intelligence, which is snooping and pooping and scouting and spying in a frontline organization, not like the CIA or anything like that. It's trying to find out who's out there in front of us, what have they got, important stuff. And the intelligence organization has some interpreters and in general provides the commanding officers with information so they can plan the attack.
You talked about you were in this intelligence outfit. What exactly were your duties with intelligence? Since you weren't like a forward observer or a scout.
No, not a forward observer. I was primarily a map maker. When I was a basic, when I was a basic member of the intelligence, my duty was was mainly making maps and showing where the trails were and the rivers and so forth as we progressed, and keeping up to date the commanding officer's situation map. Duties in intelligence are map making, map interpreting, and scouting. As I said earlier, snooping and pooping. I went to, in June of 43, I guess it was, I went to, was assigned to go to overseas. No destination is ever given. We went on a converted French luxury liner from the 20s. It was a very beat up old ship, the SS Rochambeau. It turned out that ship was going to Melbourne, Australia, where the 1st Marine Division was recuperating from and rebuilding from Guadalcanal, which was the beginning of the end of the Pacific War, was Guadalcanal. That's as far as the Japanese got. A slightly interesting thing on the way down there, about the only interesting thing, was that I just missed by 2 days crossing the date line on my birthday. I have often wished that ship had been a slightly different schedule so I could be a year younger. Didn't work out. In Melbourne, we all went ashore, of course, and the people came to choose the recruits. The officers from specialized units got to choose first. We weren't sent for any purpose other than to be bodies. And they would ask questions and try to find somebody that would fit into their specialized spot. Well, one of those officers was the 7th Marines intelligence platoon officer. A gentleman named Frank Farrell, who had been a first line reporter for the New York Times in peacetime. But anyway, he had no idea, these people had no idea what training we may have had or anything. He was from the intelligence corps, and I had been trained in intelligence. But he didn't ask that, if I knew anything about combat intelligence. His question was, who's been a Boy Scout? and I raised my hand, and he asked a few more questions. Says, I'd like you to be with me. And so I became a member of the 7th Marines intelligence platoon at the regimental headquarters. Well, after a brief stay in Melbourne, the whole division was sent up to New Guinea to get out of civilization so the guys could sober up and get their minds on their business and refresh some of their military skills. We went up to Oro Bay, New Guinea, and then right near Oro Bay, which is where ships could land, was a prominence on the seacoast named Cape Sud-Est, and our camp was there. Turns out that we were right next to the 9th Australian Division, who was training for something else. We had relations with 9th Division down in Melbourne. While we were there, they had been in the Middle East for fighting for Great Britain for about 3 years, and they were returned home. They didn't have any girlfriends anymore. They were all taken by Marines. And they didn't like it. And so there was the Battle of Flinders Street Station. Whereupon it was a big gang fight. There must have been thousands of guys on each side. And as a result of that conflict, the 9th Division was sent to New Guinea. Marines stayed on. United States is a wonderful country. But up in New Guinea, their camp was right near ours, and we were friends. There was no girls, no bars, and we knew the same street names and same places, just like old friends from home. It was all over women. Well, we trained there for a few months. One of our pastimes was there was an airfield nearby where they were bombarding the island of New Britain, and this place was named Dobadura Field. Well, we took weekends off from training, even up there in the remote area. You don't want to train every day. And on Sundays we would go over to Dobadura and watch the planes crack up. You see, they were flying big formations. They didn't have in-air refueling in those days, and to get enough planes into the air to make a good bombing run, they would take off on this airstrip, which was not paved. It was covered with landing mats, but they would take off 3 abreast, about 50 yards apart, and not every day, but a good many Sundays, something would happen to a plane. Well, when they're like that, if one plane has a problem, you get about 6 or 8 all in a big pile, just like a crash on a freeway. And that was exciting, just like going to the drag races. You know, they were not people or anything like that. You just go over and watch the airplanes crash. Good recreation. Well, we did go to found out we were going to New Britain Island, and we landed at a place called Cape Gloucester, which is the opposite end of where the main Japanese force was. We went at Labor Day time. No, we went at Christmas time. We always made our landings on holidays, hoping that would be more surprising, because Americans always respected their holidays, except we didn't. And anyway, that happened also to be the beginning of the rainy season.
Did you have any rain gear? Were you prepared at all for those kind of conditions?
No, it wasn't rainy season yet. When we were training to go to New Britain, it didn't rain because it wasn't rainy season yet. Rainy season starts in September, and we went in September, I think it was. And but it started intentionally because they thought we were too smart to make a landing in the rainy season. No intelligent person would do that. So we did it. The landing started out unpleasant. We didn't have to have landing crafts because it was a nice sandy beach, and the bigger ships could pull right up to the beach, and we could then hop in the water and wade ashore. But this beautiful sandy beach was black sand, not white. Not a pleasant sight. And there was this volcano, Mount Gulu, in the distance, which was smoking. It didn't ever erupt, but it smoked all the time. And it was a jungle there, and it started to rain that very evening. It rained for 30 days and 30 nights. The monsoons in the tropics, which was a worse enemy than the Japanese. Of course, I was not on the front lines, but the weather was terrible. And this virgin jungle, the earth was like a sponge. You know, it was not clay like Colorado or anything like that. It was good, rich black dirt with 1,000 years of leaves rotted in it. And if you would break a trail through that jungle, by the time 100 guys went over it, it was knee deep. You had to go over a ways and make a new trail. And it was like that on and on and on. So it was a bad enemy. The guys on the front, there were guys being killed and stuff like that, but it was not a big Japanese defense, and it was not a huge number of people who were hit by the Japanese fire. One memorable thing from my war career happened on New Britain, though, and that was after just a few days, the Marines were stopped by a little river that was running across right straight across where we wanted to go through, and the Japanese were on the other side of that little river, and they had us pinned down. Well, one memorable thing was the sight of a guy from the Seabees who had heard that this had steep banks and they couldn't get across without getting hit. This guy came up all by himself with his earth mover, and he was out there where the frontline troops were afraid to go, knocking down this bank and knocking down the other side so that the troops could get across fast without getting mowed down. One guy moving dirt. What a hero. I don't think they give medals for that, but he was sure a hero. The other thing I remember was at that same river on the other side. It had been heavily bombed, and the big bombs, can cut off a pretty good sized tree. Big chunks. The bombs don't break into little chunks; they break into big chunks, and the particles fly real fast. And there was a tree there that was cut off about 3.5 feet above the ground. It had been cut off by the shrapnel from a big bomb. And on the back side of that tree was a Japanese soldier who had been hiding there for protection from these explosions. Well, he was just the same height as that stump, right just above his forehead. That piece had gone through, and his head was wide open and right even with the cut off top of that stump. It didn't knock him over. The tree shielded him from the blast, but he didn't have a top on his head. That's one of the few things that I occasionally dream about. That was a horrible sight. Well, life went on, and we eventually finished up the landing there. And one of my adventures, one of my duties, was to distribute the password to the front lines. So this went out from the regimental headquarters, a new password each night for the front lines to know who's enemies and who's not when it's dark. And so one of the things that I was assigned to do was to make a tour of the whole front line and tell each unit what the password for that day was. And that all went very nice, except one night I started late and it got dark, and of course it was drizzly and all that, but we're used to that by then. But I was at the farthest unit, and I decided it was too dark to try to go back. Even with passwords, people are pretty jumpy in the dark, and nobody's supposed to be moving around. So I just called back to the regimental headquarters and said, "It's too dark, I'm not going to come back, I'll be back in the morning." No problem. And the exciting part of this, though, is that night, the regimental headquarters was shelled. And one shell made a direct hit on my pile of junk. I wasn't there. That's the only night in the Marine Corps that I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I'm a fatalist. I believe that life is predestined. You can't be killed on the wrong day.
When you went in on New Britain and these islands, did you have any contact with the natives that lived on the island?
There were no natives in this area. There were no natives on New Britain in the area where we landed. The Japanese had cleared them all out, and there were only Japanese. And fairly lightly fortified. The main Japanese occupation was at the opposite end of the island at a city called Rabaul.
Rabaul was quite a famous base and a big air base.
It was. And that's where they were mostly.
Did you face any kind of air attacks from the base there?
In New Britain itself, we did not have air attacks. When we were preparing to go to New Britain, we were attacked regularly. I think my discharge says 26 times or something like that under aerial bombardment. And we got to be peripheral to 2 big sea battles, as they were just over the horizon, and but we could hear the big guns, the Japanese and the American navies slugging it out. I don't know what those battles were named or if they were named, but that was kind of exciting. Another thing that was exciting was when the American planes the fighter planes who shepherded the bombers out of Dobadura Field, when they would come back, they would come in low over our camp and wave their wings, said, "We won again." You know, that's a real thrill to see them come back. We did it. Anyway, after this was all over, the Army came in to maintain the peace, and we went back to the Solomon Islands, to a little island 90 miles north of Guadalcanal named Pavuvu, which had been a coconut plantation owned by the Shell Oil Company before the war. Looked beautiful. It was chosen by air. The general flew over by air. Beautiful island, palm trees, nice place for the guys to rest up. So we went there and got ashore, and there was no water. You can't see whether you would think with a lot of palm trees and all there must be water. There was not. So they had to bring in some troop ships, and we had distilled water off of the ships at first, while the Seabees dug wells and created a city-type water system with pipes all over the island and all that. It was kind of interesting. Another interesting thing there in that area was these coconut trees had not been being serviced for several years, and the coconuts just ripened and fell. So you had to be very careful walking around, because if a coconut falls from 50 feet up, it can hurt pretty bad. A lot of the guys wore their steel helmets all the time because the coconuts would fall. And another thing was land crabs. With all that good food falling from the sky, the land crabs multiplied, and there got to be millions of them everywhere. And they came out at night. And so we they didn't have mosquitoes there, but everybody had to be issued a mosquito net to put up and tuck under your mattress to keep the land crabs off of you. Oh, what a mess. See, my adventures are not so much combat as on the side. Well, while we were there, the guys way back in Washington in the Navy and the Marine Corps decided that this war might be gonna last forever. This was 1944, no end in sight anywhere. It might go on forever. They said we're going to have an officer problem. Certain amount of officers can be promoted from the ranks, but not everybody. There's got to be some educated officers, and there are no healthy young men in college. We got to do something about it. So they said, we will start a pipeline. From each of the fleet Marine divisions, they had 5 at that time, 5 divisions of Marines. From each of the fleet divisions, we will choose 30 men each college term and send them back to the States to get a degree. And then in 4 years, we'll have some nice, healthy, well-qualified young men coming out of school to be Marine officers, and they'll already be committed. Well, that's actually pretty intelligent, more intelligent than many things headquarters people do. If the war is going to last forever, you need those guys coming out of school. So how are they going to choose 30 guys out of 30,000? Well, the decision was, first, we will have a written test. Everybody will take that test, whether they're interested or not, whether they're qualified or not. Not going to be any pre-selection. Everybody will sit down in their mess hall and take a written test. And so they did that. From that written test, which all 30,000 had to be graded, they would choose the top 100. And those 100 would be interviewed by the commanding general, who would choose 30 to go to school. And, well, we took the test. I made the 100. Got interviewed by the commanding general, and he chose me as one of the 30. About a week later, I got a call to come see the general at his headquarters tent. When I got there, he said, I got some good news and some bad news. Give you the bad news first. He says, you can't go back to school with this group. I said, why? What's wrong? He says, your lieutenant won't release you. He says, most people don't know it, and I'm sure you don't, but as commanding general, I only control the troops that are in my immediate headquarters. All of the rest of you are assigned to specific individual officers, and they own you body and soul. Your lieutenant says, you can't go. He couldn't live without you. This landing by then we knew we were going to Palau, way on the western edge of the Pacific into the Japanese territory. That was going to be the next landing. Says this landing can't succeed without you. I was a corporal at the time. And he says, I've pleaded with him and I've cajoled him. He says, I cannot order him to release you. I don't have that authority. I certainly didn't know that the general couldn't give an order to a lieutenant, but the lieutenant owned me. So he says, the good news is there's going to be another group on the next college term. The landing will be over, and you'll come back here when it's over, and you're already in that group. You're pre-selected for that group, because after the landing, everybody's up for reassignment, and I can grab you. and all you got to do is go across the ocean, make the landing, and come back, and you're headed for school. No guarantee of coming back. But fortunately, I did come back. The Palau was a very bloody invasion. It was in the Japanese territory from World War I, and it had been fortified for 35 years. And it was a tough battle. One of my other gruesome sights was walking down the road, and in the heat of battle, there's no time to bury people, so they stack the dead guys beside the road to be buried later. The Japanese, they leave them where they lay, but the Americans got at least brought and laid beside the road where they swelled up in the heat. We landed there on Labor Day, so it was nice and hot. And they would swell up, and the flies would crawl on them, and the maggots would be on them. And you walk down the road, and it smelled terrible. And here were all these guys stacked 3 or 4 high, waiting to be buried. That's another gruesome sight.
You were in the third wave.
On that landing.
Earlier you said you hadn't been in on much of the fighting. You were over the back.
Well, the
But
third
in
wave.
this case, you were in the third wave.
Right, but not to fight. See, are we started?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
On this landing was quite interesting, because Palau, the little island at the southern tip of the Palau group, has a big reef around it, about a 1,200-yard reef, so that landing boats could not get ashore. We had to all come ashore in tractored vehicles, Amtraks. And it was quite interesting. We got into our Amtraks and got into the water farther at sea than the battleship line. The battleships, the reef drops off abruptly, and the battleships and cruisers were going up and down along that as close as they could get. And we got on our Amtraks farther out at sea and came in under them. A battleship is really big when you're down in the water with only about 8 or 10 inches of the vehicle above the water line. And they are really, really big.
Out of 30,000, you lost 25,000 troops?
Something like that.
Let's get into that. Be sure we get that.
Okay, we'll be sure about that. On this landing, the way that the Marines went ashore, the first wave of Amtraks had no troops. There's no infantry troops. It was all heavily armored Amtraks. They were spread over 1,500-yard wide beach, about as close as they could be, maybe 5 or 10 yards apart. Coming ashore, two 75-millimeter cannons, then a flamethrower, then 2 75s and a flamethrower. And that was the first wave. Their mission was to expend all of their ammunition and fuel, turn around and get the hell out of there. But they went first. Of course, that was to pin down the enemy, because it was known it was heavily fortified. In 35 years, they had done a good job. So these guys, that was the first wave. Next came the frontline infantry, all about the same spacing, coming in right behind this heavy bombardment that started. And of course, once that started, the Navy ships had to stop. So they quit their bombardment. And then in the third wave was the first group of support for the frontline infantry, and that's where I was. I was in the third wave, being in intelligence to see what's there, and get the word back to the higher officers. What's really on that beach? You can't tell it all from aerial photographs, and so that's about as close as I came to combat. I was on the beach while it was still hot from the flamethrowers. And that was a very good place to be, because those guys were pinned down. And shortly after I was ashore, they came back out of their holes. And the next several groups of guys were really in trouble. They were in worse trouble than the front line. It's something you don't expect, but it was the way it was. And anyway, we had a really hard battle for several days. In fact, it was about a month before the island was secured. The 7th Marines landed farther south of any. In the middle of this little island was an airport. 5th Marines took that. 1st Marines means regiment. The 1st Marines were the reserve. But the Japanese had tanks and everything on that airport. 5th Marines got it worse than we did. But we got across, and then we had to go up and relieve them. And in the center of this island was the Coral Mountains that had expanded out into the about 150 maybe feet high mountains, honeycombed with caves that they had done, everything well protected. So
You had told me that there were like 30,000 troops involved in this invasion.
That's right.
And that 5,000 walked off the island.
That's
You want
right.
to get into those figures?
Well, I'm getting them killed.
I understand. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. The losses on the losses of to the Marines on this campaign were terrific. As you can well imagine, crack Japanese troops, the best. This is the outpost of their homeland defense. And they were good troops, and they were well armed, and they were well dug in. And the Marines had a terrible time there. It was the worst battle of the Pacific War up to then. Iwo Jima came later. It was a little worse, but on this island, guys were falling like flies. This is the only island where one of my guys, by then I was a sergeant and in charge of a battalion intelligence unit, and one of my scouts got killed on the drive north after we went to relieve the 5th Marines. And he was unfortunately hit by friendly fire. He was hit by, well, I know it was friendly fire because he was hit by white phosphorus, and the Japanese didn't have white phosphorus. White phosphorus is, of course, a chemical that is not stable at atmospheric pressures and temperatures. If it's exposed to the air, it catches fire. And you load a shell with it, and it scatters fire all over anything near. Poor Donnie was, his skin was just hanging on. He was still running when I saw him. He was so badly burned, he never even made it to a hospital. But that was an exposure. Well, a lot of guys weren't killed by friendly fire, but a lot of guys died. Crossing the ocean, we had these about 30,000 people with the reinforced division. 25,000 is about a normal strength of a Marine division in World War II times anyway. And we were on board several ships, combat loaded with equipment and everything. But when the Army finally came in and let us go home, about 30 days after the landing, everybody who was left went on one troop ship. There was probably maybe 4,000 or 5,000 guys on that troop ship. The other 25,000 were not all dead, but they were all either dead or wounded and had been taken out to hospital ships. There were 5 hospital ships went on that flotilla because there were no medical care for 2,000 miles. Everything had to be self-contained. They had to have enough food to last for 2 or 3 weeks. Now, it was a big thing. As we were crossing the ocean, you could not see any horizon that didn't have ships. You could probably see a couple of hundred ships if you looked all the way around. There was a lot of effort there. Well, after this war, I came back. We went back to the same place in the Solomon Islands to regroup again and get some more recruits and get retrained and re-equipped and all the things that have to be done for another invasion. And after we were back there about a week, I got a private call to go see the commanding general. General Rupertus was a very good man. He remembered me. I got down to his tent. He says, "Glad you made it back, Bill. You remember what I told you just before you left?" I said, "I sure do." He says, "Well, the next group is going to leave in about 3 weeks. Nobody knows it but you and me right now in this division. And as I said before, you're already in it. You're in the group that's going to go. When we give the test, don't take it. No point in it. You're chosen. All you got to do is get your stuff in order, take your physical, and be ready to go when it's time to go." Well, that was very exciting to me, because by then I had decided that it was, well, when I joined, I thought, as long as I'm joining, I want to be one of the guys. I want to be a Marine, not some crummy officer. But after 2 landings, I had decided it was nicer to be an officer than to be enlisted. So it was double good news. And also it was very good news. I might be home all the rest of the war. I had about 3 years or so to go yet. So I went to take my physical, and it went very smoothly. The doctor says, for God's sake, says, you're all fine, but you don't have enough teeth. You're short one. Says, you don't meet the dental requirement to go to college. But he then was also a good guy. I don't know his name. I don't know didn't know who he was then. And he violated his Navy oath and his Hippocratic oath. He says, but I think if you can survive here, you can probably make it on the food they have in the States. I'm going to put that you're qualified. Approved. So there's some very nice people in the officer ranks. And so I was ready to go. The trip back involved going over to Guadalcanal to catch a plane, fly to Honolulu, and then fly on to San Francisco. And we were going early because the first group didn't do too well. About half of them flunked out in the first term. They'd been out of school 2 or 3 years and were not prepared to compete with kids just out of school. So about half of them or more flunked out, and a good many of the colleges said they didn't want any more of these Marines to be sent to them. You know, the government paid the full tuition and everything, so they're too rough and rowdy. The community cannot tolerate that kind of people. So they sent us back to school. They set up a school in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, for this second group going to have refresher courses in high school subjects so they wouldn't flunk out, and to be taught manners and how to deal with civilized society. Anyway, they had set up this school, and I went there with the rest of the guys who were chosen at this time, and we got refreshed and we got civilized. I may be the only guy you'll ever meet who is certified by the U.S. government to be fit to associate with decent people. And I chose we got to choose our own college from a list that they prepared. I chose Colorado College in Colorado Springs because it was the only Colorado school there. And that was a place especially desirable to me because my parents lived in Colorado Springs at that time. I was going home for the rest of the war. And so I was home on leave waiting for college to start. They landed on Iwo Jima, and it was terrible. It was reported as terrible, and I knew that things are always worse than they tell the newspapers. And right in the middle of that, I got a telegram. Report first available air to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. First available government air. Oh my God, it is worse. They're calling everybody to try to bail out that mess. Well, my dad took me up to Lowry Field, and I caught a plane, and I went to North Carolina, and on a Sunday afternoon, walked into the officer of the day's office, gave him my name, and he looked at the list of names he had, says, "What are you doing here?" And I showed him my telegram. He says, "Oh my God, they sent you the wrong telegram. You should have stayed and finished out 30 days leave. You never had a leave since you was in the Marine Corps. But as long as you're here, you might as well stay." I said, "What's wrong?" He says, "Well, you can't pass the physical to go to the college. We've checked over your records, and you don't have enough teeth. And so I became the postmaster of the casual company. They had women. I made friends with the lady who was the in charge of the women's barracks mess hall, and we had a wonderful time. Camp Lejeune is isolated, have all kinds of recreation facilities. It's in a swampy area. You have canoes, you have golf courses, you have big name entertainers coming 2 or 3 times a week, and on and on. It's like paradise. And we'd go on picnics. Of course, she was the mess sergeant, and so she had access to all kinds of food, and she'd pack baskets, and I was happy because I was the sergeant in charge of the post office. I didn't have to work. I just had to make sure all the guys who had to work came to work. And anyway, everything went along beautifully like that. And one day I got a call to the company officer's office. How would you like to be a lieutenant? I said, that's what I came back to the States to do, is to be a lieutenant, but I can't pass the physical. I don't have enough teeth. He says, oh, no problem. He says, if you want to be a second lieutenant, you got plenty of teeth to be a second lieutenant. You just don't have enough to go to college. Says there's an officer candidate school starting next Monday up in Quantico. If you want to go, you can be in it. Because I had a year of college, and I was a sergeant and could be promoted from the ranks. Says, you know, these laws all have these requirements and specifications. When they get down to things like physicals, you know, they just use boilerplate. They throw in any old thing. No number of teeth you really need to go to college. You could go with dentures. But the law gets written, and then everybody has to go by the law. So I went up to the platoon commander's school. I completed it successfully. Met my future wife while I was in the school, and we got married. And I bought my uniforms. The class was about to end. I had already the bars ready to be pinned on the uniform. And 2 days before graduation, I got a call to the company office. You can't graduate with this class, I'm sorry. I says, why? Says, you can't pass the physical. And by then I knew these laws and all the details and everything, and I said that I realized this law I can't go to college. This law I can be a second lieutenant. He said, oh, be quiet, your teeth are fine. You can't be appointed a second lieutenant within 6 months of a malaria attack. Remember you were in the hospital with malaria last month? You can't be appointed until you go 6 months without a malaria attack. It's your malaria, you know, you gave it to me, but you don't like it. I don't like it either. Well, he says, that's the law. We got to go by the law. And he said, it's going to be the best duty you ever had in your life. You're here 40 miles south of Washington, D.C. You're married. Your wife is stationed in Washington, D.C. We will promote you to Master Sergeant, and you will live in the casual company. You will have no duties. Everybody will know that you're an officer waiting to be appointed. You can have liberty every night. You'll never have a life as good as this one. But I was getting fed up. I'm an impulsive person. That's another story. But I talked it over with my wife. I said, you cannot trust this Marine Corps. They build you up and they tear you down. I said, by then the war was over and I was eligible for discharge. I had enough. There was a point system for getting out. I had far more than enough points to get out. And so I'd like to just quit. So I did. She said, okay. She was a very nice wife. Anything that I wanted her to do, she would do, you know. She was my friend.
Bill, looking back on the whole scene, do you have any reflection on your experience that you would share with us that you can kind of capsule and keep a little brief? If not,
well,
don't worry about it.
The one thing that is most embedded in my arm has nothing to do with war. I learned you can't trust the United States government. If you put your faith in the government, you're going to get screwed.
Sorry I asked.
But if it hadn't been for the congressman,
Oh, God.
I would have stayed in the Marine for all my life.
Okay.
I liked being a Marine.
Except they didn't think you had enough teeth.
Oh.
Excuse me?
Except they didn't think you had enough teeth.
I had more trouble with my eligibility. This is just to finish the story. After the war, I went back to, I was discharged with disability for malaria. I had a 30% disability, so I got to go to school, not on the GI Bill, but on the rehabilitation of disabled veterans, which is a much better deal. And, but the thing is that about a year after I was in school, I got a call to the VA office. It's got some bad news for you. You've lost your disability. You haven't had malaria for over a year. and so you're going to lose your disability pay. Says I'll have to switch over and go on the GI Bill and buy my own books and get less pay and everything. So, oh no, you're still disabled. You just lose your disability pay. You're still entitled to your education and rehabilitation benefit. Being disabled 0% is much different than being not disabled. And they say that with a straight face, and it's true. I'm still disabled. 0%.
Strange world, isn't it?
We got a wonderful government. We should be proud of our congressmen.